Good morning, guys. Armand from Cool Trading Tools here. Doing the morning pre-market prep here. So, let's get started here. Yesterday was obviously the big gap down on the Korean news, and we ended up kind of closing pretty weak. Today we have a small gap up here. It's a little bit of a good thing because a lot of stocks are going to be looking the same, but there are going to be a few pockets of differences that I think are worth noting on and watching. So, let's start with what the plan is. Let's first be watching the market because as of like yesterday, if you watch yesterday's video, I mentioned that when the market starts to get a little frothy like this, a lot of stocks tend to move together, and that may still hold true today. Yesterday we formed an hourly range, so I think on the Nasdaq we're going to want to be watching this range to see what happens. Like I said, I've said for a week or two now, I think my base case scenario is we sit in range here for a little while. I think that's the most likely scenario. We break this range higher, we go test the gap fill, and my anticipation would be a daily lower high, and then continue to consolidate. We break lower today, and we're probably going to be drawn to the 50 SMA and look for a test of the 50 SMA for the first time in a few months here, really. So we'll be watching that. I mean, a big signal is, do we go back red? If we start to go towards the red, that's kind of the area where we want to be watching and see what happens when we get to that point. Very often after those big frothy days, we close, we get a small gap up. The initial move is going to be kind of to sell lower, and then we can see how we react here or anticipate a little bit as well. So, Korean market was the issue before. Not much to do. I did put it on my indice watch list, and I just set an alert for the break of the lows. I don't know necessarily what to do with it, but I'll keep an eye on it and see if it continues lower after that. So, Spacebar got stuck. Um, SMH, like I said, if you look at that, like compared to the QQQ, I said a lot of these are going to look the same here. Same situation, right? We're going to be watching these hourly levels and seeing what happens here. And you'll notice this is like the theme. Everything's going to be, as I mentioned yesterday, looks the same when things get frothy. Look at SDNK, same exact candle. Marvel, same candle. Meta, different look. It's not a semiconductor, but something to watch here. Meta actually has a good breakdown. But let's analyze SDNK first. One of the hottest stocks of the year. If things do start to go a little bit frothy, I mean, this thing's up 6,000% over the last year. So we can be watching. I mean, a huge breakdown level. This 1945 area. Like I said, we can look for the red to green and then see. Excuse me, green to red, and then my anticipation would be: do we immediately then go red and break this level, or does it kind of find support there? So I think SDNK for the short side is definitely worth watching. It's on what's traditionally been support. But if the market wants to go lower, this thing's not going to hold up as well. And there's probably a lot of people in here that have not taken profit yet that got a little nervous over the last few days. So, one to watch. Marvel, same thing. Also up a lot over the last, few months. Something to watch as a short. Like I said, a lot of these are going to trade the same. You don't need to watch all of them. Pick your price range you like, the liquidity you like, and just pick one and keep an eye on the others as more of a gauge, right? I mentioned yesterday in the SMH versus QQQ video, a lot of times when these start to happen, you'll see early signals in the other stock. And yesterday, Nasdaq was leading the semiconductors. So the Nasdaq started its bounce before. Let's pull it up. Let's go on the 2-minute chart. You can see the Nasdaq broke its opening range highs at 948. What was this doing at 948? Just basing. So you could have bought this around here, 948, with the support hold, and this was already breaking higher. That's what I mean by the early signal. The Nasdaq broke out before this by about 4 or 5 minutes, actually. And obviously it followed through more, but if you weren't in this, you can take this as a leg or trade. And that's a really good setup. And when things start to all move together, You can watch, you don't need to watch a ton of stocks because they do all move together, but there's early signals in some of them. So that's a really good point right there that, just to keep in mind. So you can watch a few of these. I think SDNK Meta, not a semiconductor stock, but it had some like strong pushes yesterday. Like here, faded off. That's a signal of like possibly ready to break down. It has a clean level around this 560 area that you can watch for the breakdown, and lines right perfectly with the green to red. One of my favorite setups is green to red because it's a clear line on the sand. It's unambiguous. It's either red or it's green, and you can take the short if it's red. So Meta's another one that I think's been in a little bit of a distribution phase for the last, really year. Hasn't been able to move higher. So if the market does want to fall, this isn't crazy for that. And you can go to I'm always talking about the longer term setups. So like, let's look at the monthly chart. Is this ready for some monthly consolidation? Possibly. It can pull back to, 400s, and it's really just setting a monthly higher low in the long-term trend. So it depends on your time frame, but this is where we use like the daily charts as potential entries and look for that. That's a difficult setup to try to trade that monthly chart, but just something worth watching here. It's not crazy for this to break down here. There's a lot of room for it to find some support at some point. So the next thing I wanted to highlight is, I've been watching space for a while now. I don't necessarily feel much of a directional edge anymore on it. The bounce I thought was obvious into this level yesterday. I took it on the red to green with the market bounce here, and it got nice follow through. The range is still there and the volume is still there. So that hasn't died off yet. So I will still be watching this. Same situation. If this breaks the IPO lows, that's probably like, okay, we're heading lower here, and that's worth watching, right? It's also formed a nice little hourly range. We'll see if it wants to get a bounce going. Like I said, we'll watch the green to red line and use the NASDAQ market as a proxy. This started its bounce as well right around when the NASDAQ did. So it's still following that. I'll come back to Poet because this is maybe my favorite setup of the day. But just one thing I want to point out, FCell had some news on it. Let's take a look here. Something along the lines, this is a cool thing about the Cool Trading Tools newsletter, is you can search directly in it, the news right on your newsletter of what's going on. So FCell Energy Fit announced a strategic partnership to clean power data centers, right? One of the pockets of relative strength that we've seen in the market is data centers, right? So APLD held up well yesterday. Riot held up well yesterday. FCell, if we need a long here, I think is at a breakout spot. So if the market wants to hold up and you're of a long mindset, I think this is a great one to look at for continuation here. It's not extended, gap up with some news. I am a little bit bearish overall is my general opinion of the market. But if you're looking for longs, these data centers are the ones holding up, and this FCell's got a PR out. So not a bad look on that. One more stock, we'll go to the Poet here, and this is also in the semiconductor space, which we've shown semiconductors are a little bit weak. A lot of people, including myself, are watching this for a swing trade. It was at the IPO breakout highs recently, the previous IPO highs. It was on this area of support here. It was on the 50 SMA of support here. It was a really obvious. It had it had a flag going after the big push, strong sector in semiconductors, and it had three identifiable supports that I had, the 50 SMA, previous support price action, and then the pre-IPO high or the previous IPO high. What that does is when more people, even if you don't use the 50 SMA as a trader, a lot of people do. So what this happens is you're stacking confluence. You now have three different types of traders, ones that use price action support like myself, ones that maybe use significant pivots like myself as well, 50 SMA traders. They're all seeing support now. So that just gets more people involved. Now, market weakness yesterday has kind of looked like it's a failure to break down. I thought this was a great entry point. What does this mean now, right? This is breaking the support. Now, all the people over the last 3 months or even you could probably say into here, that have been holding or looking to buy for the continued breakout on a semiconductor on a recent IPO. If this breaks this low, everybody's underwater now. And this is not necessarily the biggest semiconductor proven company. It's an easy one for people to bail on if the market starts to get a little frothy. So it's two things: easier to bail on, obvious failed breakout on multiple supports. It's now trading below those supports. If it goes lower today under like yesterday's low, and everybody's underwater now that was buying over the last 3 months on it here. So what happens if they get a little nervous? They're all anticipating this breakout is not working. They bail, and for a day trader, momentum wise, that can get us enough to push down when people bail out, and we can get what we need as a day trader on that. So it's a little psychological aspect. Is that it was a super obvious breakout. Now a clear failure. People, if they see it move lower over under yesterday's low, the low of yesterday, they are reason to bail out, and that can be enough for us to get big momentum pushes out as people bail out of the trade, and you can kind of trade with that, take some off, let the rest ride, and see if it plays out longer. So that's kind of what I'm watching today. Um, Data centers, if you're of a long mindset, watch the hourly ranges on semiconductors and NASDAQ. They all look the same. Look for early signals from the other people, other stocks in those sectors. Data centers works too. If you're looking for data centers, do the other data centers go, and then see is yours lagging that. That can be an early signal as well. And then SpaceX, Poet, still great range. Poet, big breakdown. So awesome, guys. You guys have a good trading day, and we'll see you tomorrow.